I'm Kate Seelye, a Senior Vice President of the Middle East Institute, and it's such a pleasure to welcome you here tonight to tonight's panel on the soft power of the arts in a changing Middle East. Tonight is a very, very special occasion for us for so many reasons, among them the fact that tonight represents the kind of programming and conversation that MEI is very excited to engage in as part of its new arts and culture program being spearheaded by Lynn Snedge, who is sitting here in the front. Lynn joins us from Beirut, where she programmed on the arts for the British Council and has a very deep knowledge about this very exciting scene in the region. Over its many decades, MEI has programmed on culture, but we've never done it in a sustainable and committed way, and now we're changing that, and that's because we think that art in today's Arab world is playing a greater role than ever before. It's a greater part of the transformation in the region that's taking place. Young artists especially are turning to conceptual arts, to video, to spoken word, to expose and address the issues that they're grappling with in their communities and to actualize their views about what's happening. Artists are no longer just making pretty art in the Arab world. They're talking about real social issues that relate to their environment, to their gender, to their frustrations, and to their aspirations for a better future. And in the process, they're becoming key civil society actors. So it's really an exciting time to be following this movement. And in the process, they're becoming, well, they're being embraced by the international art circles. They're being bought by the British Museum and the Centre Pompidou and showing up in major exhibitions. In case anybody's missed it, there's a huge exhibition of contemporary Arab art right now at the new museum, 4 floors of contemporary Arab art in New York City. It's really remarkable. And so that's our plan, to bring, and we also think it's important to bring this into the policy conversation, this new dynamic that's taking place. We think it's important that Washington understand what young Arabs, what young Arab artists are doing, and to take that into account and as they seek to make smarter policy. So we're going to be doing these panels on a regular monthly basis, bringing artists, bringing curators, showing films, and we hope you'll continue to join us. But we also have big aspirations for the future. And we're hoping to open an art gallery to exhibit contemporary Arab art here in the heart of Washington, D.C. MEI has a carriage house, and we'd like to turn it into a permanent exhibit for rotating, a permanent gallery for rotating exhibits of art from Edge of Arabia, from Palestine, from Iraq, from Egypt. So that will hopefully transpire if our fundraising efforts are successful. So we'll keep you all posted. So thank you so much for coming out today. It's great to have such a big turnout. We have a really exciting panel ahead of us. We're thrilled to be hosting tonight 3 amazing people who are a big part of the art ecosystem in the Arab world, an artist, an art curator, and an art funder. They're all very organically linked. I'm going to tell you a little bit about them. You can find more about them in your handouts, but very briefly, Sarah Abu Abdallah is a Saudi-born artist. She comes from the Eastern Province. Right now, she's studying digital media at the Rhode Island School of Design, one of our top art schools. So that's very exciting. Sarah has been studying art under the guidance of her mother since a very early age. She's now 22, and she's considered a rising art star. 23. 24. Oh. Don't tell anybody that. You're 22 forever. She's shown widely. She's shown at the Serpentine in Gallery in London, at the last Venice Biennale, at the Sharjah Biennale, and she's working on other amazing art. And she's here in DC as part of the Culture Runner Tour. Culture Runners is a program of Edge of Arabia, which Stephen is going to tell us more about, in which he's brought artists together in an RV and is traveling them across America to meet with and encounter communities and to engage in a conversation and a dialogue to increase empathy and understanding. So they took off from Houston on Monday morning, and they just arrived in DC about 5 minutes ago. So we're going to hear more about what they encountered along the road. Stephen is remarkable. He helped co-found Edge of Arabia, which is a collective of Saudi artists founded in 2003 by Stephen and two Saudi artists in Abha in southern Saudi Arabia. I'm going to let you, Stephen, tell that remarkable story. But since 2003, he's helped to build Edge of Arabia into an internationally acclaimed collective of artists. They've shown at the last 3 Venice Biennales. Their work is selling internationally for quite a bit of money. That's not the important part of it, but that's also very significant. And they're really reshaping the art scene in Saudi Arabia. Stephen is himself a curator and an artist. And finally, we're going to hear from Oussama Rifahi, a man who's done so much through the Arab Fund for Art and Culture to raise the level of art production in the region. Oussama directs AFAC, which was established in 2007 to support emerging artists in the region. To date, it's given out about $9 million in funds to about 600 artists. In the old days, in the Arab art world, it was almost impossible to get money for your projects. Now, if you're a documentary maker, you can go online, apply for money, and if your project is good, you'll get funded. So it's really an incredible, incredible service. So we're going to start by hearing from each one of them about their projects and their work, and then we're going to go a little bit deeper into the impact of their art, this question of soft power, and hopefully we'll have a conversation on this panel and a conversation with the audience. So I'm going to just move down here a little bit closer and start with Sarah. Sarah, let's see, let me get this a little closer. It's a challenge to emerge as an artist in Saudi Arabia for either a male or a female. There is not an artistic infrastructure in the country. Tell me about how you became an artist and what was your path to getting here today?
Basically, I went to art school, and I think that's the beginning. I went there as a pure coincidence because I didn't know much about contemporary art, but I thought it would be interesting to study that, basically. I went to a school in Sharjah, established by Sheikha Hur al-Qasimi, and there was my introduction to contemporary art, but as all art students, I was like finding my way, and by the end of my last year, I made a video base that is called the Saudi Automobile, which you can see in the flyer. I've seen a wreck car, and I painted it pink, and then that was my start with experimenting with video. Then I went for 2 years back for my house in Saudi Arabia, and throughout these 2 years, I started studying art, especially Middle Eastern art.
Who were your inspirations, for instance, in studying Middle Eastern art?
I went, hard to name names, but I watched lots of cinema, lots of movies coming from the Arab world, especially from Palestine, because I think this is the richest. Iran as well. I mean, like, there are many Iranian movies. I studied world cinema in general, and video art. And I started experimenting in the quiet of the Eastern region. And it is pretty isolated where I live, but at the age of the internet, you can accomplish with just internet connection more than you can accomplish in I don't know, a city full of libraries and resources. So that was very...
so you're working in your home, making these videos, kind of working in isolation, you said?
Yeah, in isolation. I had few friends who'd help me like go out and just with a tripod and a camera, record things and then go back home and like montage them into... And I can show you... like,
can we turn the lights down briefly?
This is the one that I made on before I left Sharjah.
What is the name of this?
Saudi automobile. Needs to buffer. The video goes on for 10 minutes.
So tell us about this video.
Fully.
Where did you, what are you saying, where did you find the car?
The car was actually just in the backyard of my college. Somebody was casting car parts and just threw it there because they didn't want it. And I've seen it for 3 years, and I said that if nobody came and claimed it, I will. So it was my way to claim it. And I just felt sorry for the heap of metal that's just lying there. And
you decided to paint it pink?
I decided to give it life, basically, to give it value. And I mean, I think that was like part of like me feeling. It was also that time when you're graduating, you don't know what you're doing in your future. I'm going back home. Mobility is going to be a problem. Right. So it was just like this state of hopelessness, but I'm like trying to cover it up.
I see, by painting it pink and kind of bringing it to life.
Yeah, to life and giving it value. Then I did like more experimentation. And I did like, for example, I'll show you 2 minutes of this. Maybe here. I was very inspired like by Lynch, David Lynch. Okay. And many cut up techniques and text on video. Yeah, this work I have like this.
So this is life at home?
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. I have like, I want the smashing TV.
Okay.
Like this one.
Oh yes, let's see this one.
Where is it? Okay. A bit more. I'm gonna skip a lot of it. I was aiming for more here. Yeah.
Okay. It's harder than it seems to break a TV set.
It took 5 minutes to break this one. Like it's
It takes
spread
a lot of
over
work.
5 minutes. So I do consider things like frames and my background in painting and how to structure the image. And I'm using lots of stories from around me, my best friends and their life stories, and I'm trying to translate it into images.
So, right, so all drawn from personal experiences
Yeah.
to talk about
Yes.
your life and...
Yeah, and those around me in a very subtle way, because like many of these stories are very private, so I'm trying to find ways to say them, basically.
And how are people in Saudi Arabia reacting to your videos? Where do they see them? How do they react? What's been the response?
This one I never showed in Saudi Arabia, but I did show in Rizoma, Venice Biennale, and I mean, it was all mixed reviews. Some thought that I was portraying Saudi women in a negative light. Some thought it's empowering them. It's very subjective.
And how would you characterize what you're doing? Just
I always say that I'm not interested in preaching, and once I finish the work, I don't care how it's perceived, pretty much. But I mean, for me, it's just the story of my friend who got a rod and smashed the TV in her family house because her father refused to let her work in a mixed environment. And she was feuding with them. So I did, and she's very calm and petite, and I really like that raw energy and like going, this frustration. I think we all can relate from anywhere in the world to these emotions. I could be feeling frustrated, feeling alienated. I mean, it's like human emotions.
absolutely. But what's so important is that we rarely get to see the expression of these emotions out of Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
So it takes on great significance. Well, thank you, and we'll talk more about your art. Let's continue with the conversation. Bring the other panelists in. Stephen, you've just come on a long journey from Houston, and your journey began 10 years ago plus in Abha. Tell us about Edge of Arabia. It's a great story, kind of what you've done and what you're trying to accomplish with it. Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, we just were on the road for 9 hours, and we talked quite a bit on and off, but it was really kind of brought me back to the beginning of the whole project, I guess, which is, you know, there's something really interesting about when artists travel, and artists as storytellers, like as Sarah was showing in her videos, and artists as this kind of subjective window, which is quite rare, I think, in our world. I mean, we're here in Washington where, you know, you're at the center of a very strong story and a very strong kind of power. And I remember when I was at school, I used to make little collages in my sketchbook. And when I started traveling around the Middle East, you know, that was all I really wanted to do, was to make little stories. And I think we got kind of caught up in this moment in history, which was like a live event. And it was really strange because you're making these tiny stories in your sketchbook and you're collaborating with friends in Tehran or Kurdistan or wherever we were. And then you're kind of looking over your shoulder, and there's this huge story unfolding that you kind of are starting to deconstruct and to say, well, actually, that doesn't really fit with, because you're in these places that are being presented by, your country in a way. So it was this, Edge of Arabia came out of that strange moment in history and sort of trying to believe in the potential that there was a space for this subjective story that might be really small, but why not try and blow it up as big as you could, even if you're just artists. And at that moment, you had this whole thing of the embedded journalist who went with the U.S. Army, and there was this kind of presentation that journalist was telling a kind of truth because they were embedded. And I think the rise of the media story, with all these centers of drama and essential either negativity or celebrity or extreme pleasure, sort of became this unified sort of portrait of the world. And as artists traveling around the Middle East at that time, I think we just wanted to push in a kind of hopeless way another alternative. And Edge of Arabia really came out of when I came to Saudi. I was traveling around. I was in Yemen. It was March 2003, so it was literally a few days before the actual invasion of Iraq. There was protests all over the streets of Sana'a. I was this British guy. I was on my own. I was pretty comfortable. I wasn't scared, but if I hadn't become accustomed to being an artist and realizing that people aren't actually, there's a big difference between politics and people, then I should have been scared, because the streets were full of armored cars and burning American flags and British flags and all this kind of stuff. But I crossed over the Saudi border, and I was taken into this tiny little arts village in Abha, which you've been to, and this was really where this project took shape, because in those studios, where there were maybe 9 artists living in these studios in Abha, southwest Saudi Arabia, a very important, rich historical part of the history of the Arab world and the history of the Islamic world, but a real edge in terms of no one was hearing any of these stories, not even in Saudi Arabia. And who are these artists? And as I started to speak to them and talk to them, and we were watching these news images, and they were asking me, what are they saying? What's this guy, Tony Blair saying? And I was going, what's your guy saying on your news channel? And we're sort of piecing the story together, and we're kind of realizing that actually this place in Abha was more of a center to understand that present moment in history, i.e. the ideology that had been exported and sort of radicalized many people, came more from there than it did from any of these places that were being bombed. And that really motivated us. We kind of subconsciously, I think we said, let's become friends and let's do something against this this lack of an interest in looking at where things really start.
Right, because should we point out 7 of the hijackers came from that area, sort of Abha.
Yeah, they're shy to talk about it because, it was a real shock. But what was really interesting was it was such a domestic kind of storytelling. We were chatting, and they'd go, "Oh yeah, I went to school with those 2 guys that were the brothers that went into the Trinidad." I go, "What do you mean you went to school with them?" And they were like, "Yeah, we went to school in their little." It was a tiny village, and I was saying, "Well, what were they like?" They said, "Well, they were just like me. They had the same upbringing, and our parents were friends." And one became a conceptual artist, and the other 2 went to Afghanistan, were kind of recruited. And as you started to listen to them, you realized, at a young age, they were invited to a summer camp, and the summer camp became a bit of a sort of, learning Islamic camp. And it was all very understandable. It wasn't this big, dramatic, good and evil story. It was young men, no jobs. And it was very interesting that, you had artists came out of that choice. And I found that really profound and actually a real I had to start this project. I was an artist. I've given up being an artist now. I'm jealous because it's a completely different world. But there was a responsibility, I think, to to amplify those voices from that place.
So to amplify the voices of the artists, the other side of the coin, and to empower them through this collective. I mean, tell us more about the collective and kind of what it's come to achieve. Yeah,
Edge of Arabia. I know you. We were talking in the car about this whole platform that Edge of Arabia. You know, we started as a group of friends, and we started doing exhibitions, and we got caught up in the art world. We did shows at big art events, and we got a lot of press in international newspaper because a lot of people are interested in Saudi Arabia, obviously. And Edge of Arabia became very well known as in my opinion, in retrospect, it was quite conservative actually, because we just flowed into the systems that were already there. The Venice Biennale and, like you say, the British Museum and all these people. But what I'm more interested in now, I think, is that you know, we retained independence, and our project, which was set up by myself and a Saudi artist, is a truly independent organization, and it's actually kind of owned by the artists. And actually, I don't think we should follow that model of, you know, where art becomes part of the power in some strange way, like that it could, you know, it just gets absorbed into another museum program, because those institutions are actually not very effective at empowering artists, at empowering those voices. In fact, what they usually do is they start to collude with the political power, and you know, this is what the conversation we were having a little bit on the.
They become more commodities in a way for the art world.
Right, yeah, definitely. Yeah. The market. You talked about the prices. You know, as soon as anyone got a whiff that these Saudi artists were making artwork that people wanted, the galleries and the auction houses were all over it because it's a valuable commodity, and you saw artwork and artists being very much. I mean, we're in America, so this is the land where, you know, everything seems to be, you know, quite driven towards becoming a commodity. And I think that's a real problem for some of the artists, you know, that came out of Saudi Arabia, because it's such a wealthy country, and they can make money fairly quickly, but it's at the expense of their real voice.
Right. But tired of that, you've sort of moved beyond this notion to culture runners, which you see then as an opportunity to do more profound work to build bridges and to connect with other communities. So maybe you're getting back to the roots of what Edge of Arabia began as you take this journey to MIT to do a series of programs with artists. And I guess the question would be, culture runners, you know, how can you make culture runners meaningful and impactful and in these encounters?
Mm-hmm. Well, culture runners came out of the idea of just connecting stories between the Middle East and the US, and finding a format to do that wasn't that would be as effective and exciting as possible. So we chose the format of a road trip, and we chose an RV as a center, which is broken down actually now in Asheville, but it's been fixed and it's on its way. And really do something where, you know, you don't just drop in somewhere and do something and pop out, but you can have something that through many encounters over 3 years builds up some kind of network. I think that's what we're interested in. I think a network is very powerful these days, more powerful than an audience. That's what we were talking about. An audience, people talk about, we got 60,000 people saw our exhibition at the Venice Biennale. You know, I've got a 30-strong network of activists who will, you know, kick your ass over your 60,000, you know, because they're, and I really believe in that. And even on this little trip we've done, we've met the beginnings of an interesting network, whether it be a photographer in Asheville or the policeman that stopped us because the back of our RV was wobbling. But, you know, I like this idea of a network, and I think this is what we're interested to do in the US, that we build a genuine network that will stay in touch and that will continue to work together. And we don't have to do it through, of course we want to work with all the institutions and things, but you know, not at the expense of an ordinary bond, right, and a human bond. Yeah.
Well, I think this segues nicely into Oussama, who is also building a network or helping to, you know, sustain and empower a network of artists across the region. Oussama, when I first heard about AFAC, I think an Arab artist said to me, a dream has come true. And it really is a dream for so many Arab artists. Talk a little bit about AFAC and how it arose and the context for both art and art funding out of which AFAC came into being.
Right. I mean, to put it in context, the Arab world is about 300 million people that it spans across a very large period of space, and it is also a region that is predominantly very young. So we have about 60% of the people and the inhabitants of this region that are less than 25 years of age. And historically, there has not been any system to support independent art production. So there is no tax incentive system as you have it in North America, nor public support either at arm's length or direct like you would have it in Western Europe and so on. And back in 2007, a group of practitioners, some of them were Europeans, Americans, and some local, sat down together and said, let's just get some seed funding into a small foundation. And then the idea was that anybody that would have a project to produce could apply, and through meritology, if you have a good project and you get selected by committees of independent jurors, you get some money and some support, professional support to actually do your work. And that grew up very nicely. Now we're, in 2007, we started with a few $100,000. Now we give about $2.5 million per year, and we give about 150 projects every year. So that has gone now to be one of the few, if not the only independent institution that does that. We feel very lonely, actually. We would love to have more AFACs around in the Arab region there, because the region is very much underserved in terms of support structure for the Arab region there. And this has evolved as well in a position where artists that are actually getting some of those grants from AFAC get a stamp of quality. It allows them to be recognized by festivals, by producers, and allows them to continue their careers and so on.
Yeah, you're giving them an incredible foot up. How has $2.5 million a year to the art world influenced and changed the art world in the region, or artists? The community of artists.
Well, I mean, there are so many things that come into play. There's one parameter is not, $2.5 million is a very small amount when you think about, all the creativity that is all, what happens in the region right now. But it has allowed, we've ran series of documentary programs that have been some very interesting projects that came out. Lots of the young and emerging artists have received a grant and continue from there on. So, in fact, if you go to the new museum, if anybody is visiting New York, many of those that are showing up there had at some point in time taken a grant from AFAC. If you go to the MoMA, there's a permanent installation by Akram Zaatari, who is one of the AFAC grantees and so on. So it is a bit of like small drops in the ocean, but seed funding for unleashing talent and allowing them to flourish.
But it must be expanding the art scene considerably. I mean, between 2005 and today, I mean, if I know that maybe I can get $30,000 to make a documentary, I might consider becoming a documentarian. But if there's no money, I'll probably become a, public relations specialist. So how's it affecting?
It's more than the financial. Psychologically, the fact that you are able, if you're an independent artist, you are able to actually talk about anything you want without any censorship or so on. So that's, AFAC allows an artist to feel free and to really express himself in the way that he wants. And this is actually the important thing in our region right now. It is, through, that's not funding that you would get from a government or from, a specific corporation or anything like that. That's one of the precious things that our independence, the fact that we attribute funds through a very rigorous system of selection through independent jurors that we vary every year, we change every year.
Interesting. So tell us a little bit about the kind of projects you funded. I mean, are you seeing more requests for money for film, for documentaries, for installation art? I mean, what's the trend right now?
Well, this varies a lot. So we typically, we run through these exercises every once in a while. So we classify the type of project that we fund into 3 categories: what we call art for art's sake, and something art for a cause, and art for knowledge. And typically, they have been kind of equal parts, previous to 2010. Since the so-called Arab Spring, there has been a resurgence of this art for a cause. And we have seen lots of engaged projects, some by very young artists. So I can give you just a couple of examples. A young Yemeni woman, Sarah Ishaq, who documented a bit the revolution in Yemen through the story, the microcosm of the revolution within her own family, and how, and that movie is called Father motherland. But what happened when she experienced that Arab Spring there. We can talk about young Egyptian filmmaker who talk about the child labor in Cairo, and a variety of projects that deal with the changes that happened back in 2010 and even what's happening today. So you could really physically look at the range of projects that are happening in the region right now and get snapshots of the good things that happen, the bad things that are happening, the backlash, the openings and the closing, and so on.
And of course, these were voices that would have remained silent, 10 years ago. They wouldn't have had an outlet that they now
Absolutely.
have.
I mean, what best alternative to talk about, what happens in the region than through arts and culture? We could take many forms. It could be something that is an abstract level, just to be expressing themselves, or it could be telling about some very specific issues that are happening there. Without, a bit of seed funding, you're unable to do any of those projects there. And what we do is more than half of the project we fund are by emerging artists. That is artists that would not have been able to actually receive funding to do an exhibition of photographs or a documentary film or performance art and so on.
Well, let's move into this question of the kind of impact that this burgeoning Arab art scene is having kind of on a social level. And Sarah, let's talk about your art. I mean, clearly, your art and what you're doing represents sort of a changing region, a changing Saudi Arabia. What sort of impact do you hope your art to have, or what kind of impact is it having, or is that not even a relevant question?
I mean, from a personal, my personal wish would be that it is to encourage young people, especially women, to make art in the region and in Saudi Arabia, and for art education to be, to be established there. I mean, this is my highest wish.
That's your dream, right? And we're seeing more young Saudi women making art, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, it's both preceded your work and it's following your work. So maybe talk a little bit about how you're part of this movement that's quite unique. I don't know, it's very small to be called a movement. I still have to find peers, let's say. There are a few... it's a huge country and they're scattered all over. There are attempts to bring them together. There are attempts to start new organizations and art galleries, and the Jaffa Arabia is trying. And because there's a voice in the region, young people are trying to understand what art is and trying to make art. So. Right, I mean, because it's gone from almost no galleries to, as you said, I think there are galleries in Riyadh now, in Jeddah, and clearly that's in response to the production of art. Where is it coming from? I mean, is it happening and isolated, lots of people like yourself doing it in their homes and somehow finding each other? How is it?
Internet.
Okay.
The internet, I mean, it's the major, it's the social networks are very powerful in connecting people.
I see. Yeah. So the internet is a key instigator of this. Although when you got to Abha, Stephen, there was an arts village. Was that the beginning of something, or was that just what has the Arts Village gone on to become? And then we'll talk a little bit more about it.
Well, yeah, it's back now. I went a few years ago, and it was like a ghost town with tumbleweed going through it, because the governor at the time didn't really like art as much as the previous governor. So it was very much to do with this kind of patronage system of who liked art. But just in the context in Abha, in this region, the Prince Khalid bin Faisal, he's a poet and an artist, a wonderful man actually, and he had created the first kind of public arts village, I think, in Saudi Arabia, which had 14 studios, and it was very open. And I think he had a kind of vision that people were going to come and do some nice watercolors, and definitely there was that going on and some nice pictures. But of course what happened was that poets and writers, thinkers, creative people came together with the internet, and to be honest, it was pretty far from camels and nice pictures of landscapes. When I went there, it was radical, actually. But it was both. So you went in the studio and you had the people learning to paint, you know, and doing their color theory, just like we did at art school. And then on the other hand, you had, you know, all this stuff that looked like frustration and anger and things ripped out of the newspaper and like electronic experiments with like radio transmissions. And it was very much to do with, you know, with that moment in time where the internet came and that thing. But I think that if that arts village hadn't been there, I would not have anywhere to go. The artists there would not have anywhere to go. There would never have been a connection between us. There'd never been a connection, I don't think, between some of the people in that region to gather. And I think that's those places, like Sharjah Biennale, like the art school, there were just these very few places, I think, that really made a big difference. I mean, just to go back to the point of what's happened, I think the most profound thing that's happened since I started working in Saudi Arabia is the raising of the status of the artist, both internally and externally. When I came back from Saudi Arabia, nobody gave me the time of day when I tried to show them what I was interested in. No one from museums. Now they can't wait to get their visa and get some of the cake. But when I started, no one was interested, and there was this assumption: no, creativity couldn't come from there because we've seen those images and those people aren't very creative and they're very extreme from the West. And in the same time in Saudi Arabia, there was a very sad kind of culture of going, well, you know, the West has the great sort of status and brands, and you know we can't have that yet because and I think art's different from that. I think creativity isn't something, it can come out of nowhere because every classroom, you know, in every village has a creative person and a scientific person and a this person and that person. And I think that's the key, is that you give the platform or you give the school or you give the thing and things will flourish. And that's what's happened in the last 10 years, is the raising of the status of the artist has had a profound effect. And I think a lot of young artists see that, and it is something to do now. Sarah, they read about Sarah in her success, even though she's so young, and they go, I want that because it's a lot more exciting than my alternative, maybe.
Right, because you can travel and see the world and, you know, have an income. And yes, I think this is part of the critical empowerment of the Arab artist and the Saudi artist. And so given this increased empowerment of the artist, both inside the country and internationally, how has it changed the role that they're playing? I mean, do you see them playing more of a role? Or, I mean, they didn't play any role before, or a minimal role. Now, what is the role that you're observing as a curator of Saudi art? So they have more of a voice, but who's listening, and how is that shaping perceptions and expectations?
Well, there was a role before. When we got there was a really interesting relationship between a group of artists and the Ministry of Culture, which there was, I think, in many parts of the Arab world, there was this very close link between the Ministry of Culture and the artists, because there was the exchange program to abroad, and there was funding coming from the ministries. And you hear about it in every country. It seems to be the same, but it was kind of compromised, because it was definitely, you'd get to an embassy party in Washington and you'd have an exhibition of Saudi art. And it was this kind of thing. And we fell into that when we started. And I think that there was a break. You know, I'm not really a curator of Saudi art. I'm kind of interested in the space between the conversation. But we started to do things that were really a reaction against, you know, there's nothing worse for me than, you know, an art exhibition with a bunch of business people selling each other, you know, planes or weapons or something, and it happens a lot in political circles. Art is used very much as a platform for social business, and we were very much drawn into that. And when we were successful, it was like, yeah, we want this, we want you for our thing. And we're like, well, we don't like that. It's not. But that seemed to be very strong when we started.
Interesting. Yeah, Oussama, do you want to comment? I think your mic is working. It's working. Just pull it. Oh, I see. It keeps going off. I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, I mean, an interesting case study would be for Saudi Arabia would be to think about. Anybody heard about the YouTubers of Saudi Arabia? The YouTubers. Yeah. Okay. So actually, you know, Saudi Arabia is one of the countries that is the most connected in the world ever. You know, they have the highest rate of penetration of use of the YouTube, the Twitter, and so on. And what's remarkable, just to see how the creativity, how it transpires and so on, in a place where there is no theater, no public theaters, where you cannot talk about many things and openly and so on. A group of very young filmmakers between 20s and 25s have gone together, and they have, I visited them 2 years ago in Riyadh and Jeddah, and you go in and it's a bit like a Google office. You've got like those large IMAX with art hanging from the walls, and these people are actually producing every other week small 10-15 minutes videos that they put on YouTube, and the hit rates are in the order of millions. So there are physically millions of people watching those guys, and they talk about lots of social issues. They talk about it in a very clever way.
Like what mainly?
Anybody seen the video on YouTube, No Woman, No Drive?
Yes.
Okay, so it is, they touch upon very sensitive issues in a way that is, nobody really knows, are they really critical of or against that. So anyway, they found their space, and it's just one phenomena about how filmmakers can actually express themselves in this particular context. Now, if you zoom out of Saudi Arabia and you go to different places of the Arab world, and that's a huge mosaic of different contexts. When we talk from Mauritania all the way through Egypt and into the Gulf countries and so on, then you have different responses to what's happening today in the Arab world, and everyone is different from each other.
Well, let's talk about that, because you have this view, this wide perspective from Morocco to Iraq, and I'm wondering if there is a thread connecting all of these artists, or if there's some sort of shared narrative that's coming out in their art that you're witnessing.
More than a shared narrative, there is kind of 40 years of backwardness. Unfortunately, there has been kind of bad conditions for freedom of expression, for creativity, and this part of the world. That's a common thread, unfortunately. But also there is a common language that is starting to emerge, and that was helped a lot by social media over the last 10 years and 5 years. What the usually typical flow exchange of culture between Europe and the Arab world is now we start to see some more horizontalities, where we have groups of musicians that travel between Algeria, they go to Egypt, and we have some movement from Iraq all the way to Lebanon and so on. So there is a lot more exchange between those countries at the same time.
So Moroccan artists are following Egyptian artists and being influenced by them.
In spite of problems of getting visas, difficulties to produce, you're not able to produce films. You cannot even screen films in Egypt. Nobody has seen films in Egypt from Algeria or from Lebanon and so on. So we have now starts of things, people sharing things over the internet, and then you don't have to be in a country to see actually what the other has done. And that's something that has been really dramatically changed the conditions today. People, especially the young people who are very much able to communicate and express themselves over the things, are able for once not to see only what's happening in the region, but globally. And that's not an easy thing, because you discover the frustration is accumulated because you realize that actually there are people living in different conditions elsewhere, and that kind of adds a layer of difficulty to those people.
How has the Arab Spring affected cultural production in the region? Is there much greater cultural production in response to the transitions taking place? And do you see Arab artists creating new partnerships or with civil society actors? What's changed since the Arab Spring, in your view?
Well, that's a tough one, but to start an answer on this one is that we have seen a lot in the 2011. We have seen an explosion of spontaneity, of creativity there. Lots of people were going down on the streets and filming with smartphones, editing this on the go and putting it on YouTube and so on. We've received a large number of these kind of spontaneous things that didn't necessarily have the same aesthetical quality that you would see. And we're not talking only about visual arts. We're talking about documentary film. We're talking about performance art, street performances, graffitis, writings, blogs, and all of these things there. Over the last 2 years, when what the so-called Arab Spring turned into something like more of a winter right now, right. And where unfortunately we are seeing if you look at the narrative, the public narrative, you have this, the two position. It's either ISIS or SISI. It's either ISIS and extremism, or kind of authoritarian regimes in parts of the world and so on.
ISIS,
CC and ISIS there. Art and culture are able to introduce a bit more granularity and complexity to seemingly a simple narrative that people have. Either we have the terrorist, or we have the dictatorship there. So artists are coming in and giving nuances. They are telling stories from different angles. They're exploring different perspectives, and this is one of the amazing things actually that art is able to do at this moment now. Second thing that we see a lot is, and it's an important role, artists are able to start to archive and document those moments of history, those snapshots of what's happening around us, because many of these are disappearing very quickly. Lara Baladi, who you're going to meet in MIT very soon, is working on an archiving project trying to document what's happened over the course of the 2 years in history and so on. So the artist takes on the role of providing a bit of enlightening a bit the narrative, the common narrative that is coming from the mass media type of thing, of documenting what's happening there. And also sometimes they even expect artists to provide an educational role, to try to teach people actually of what happens and so on.
So Stephen, maybe you want to chime in. I mean, can art counter ISIS or Sisi?
So I'm out of my depth on that one.
Or how does art intersect with sort of the political reality? I mean, does art just observe, or is it...
Well, I got an interesting take on this, because I think that ISIS are using creativity sometimes more effectively than artists, and I think it's very frightening. And I remember going to a lecture in London by this think tank, and they were showing, it was like Foreign Office people, and I was interested because it was hip-hop videos of the extremists or something, and it was showing this content being circulated around British, like Bradford and Luton and British Muslim communities, and it was graffiti and hip-hop and just, but radical. And I was like, and they were going, well, what should we do about this? And we should do this, we should do this. And I was going like, well, you got to combat it with content. You got to get into that same platform. You talk about YouTube. Telfaz is so powerful.
This is the Saudi YouTube collective.
Yeah, because a young person goes into YouTube looking for something, looking for a reflection of their own world, or looking for a story, and they might find Mr. ISIS, and I saw Ahmed Mata sent me an ISIS video recently that was using West African Ganawa music, and it was, it's in the same way that the artists are connecting across North Africa, so are the extremists, and I think this is a really important thing that policymakers and whoever's really seriously interested in this area should look at, that artists are a really powerful, they're a really vital sort of alternative that has to be out there. And these guys are very fast. These guys in ISIS, they will create things much faster than artists, because they don't procrastinate.
Right.
They're on a mission. And I think that's really frightening, because they rise out of nowhere, and they didn't just use trucks and guns. They used the internet. They were using Whisper when their internet was shut down, this like text application. They were faster than the US government, and they were faster than the British government, and they were creative. Creativity is not necessarily a good thing always.
Right.
Sorry.
Interesting answer. Well, we're running out of time, and I want to get through one more round of questions before we turn to the audience. Sarah, you talked about your art and hoping it will give voice to young Saudi women, and in that context, you are a change maker. But now you're here in the United States, and you're at RISD, and you're traveling through the United States. Are you also looking to change perceptions and attitudes here through your art and through the work you're doing? What's your relationship to the United States?
I shy away, and from the word like trying to change. Or as a person, I'm merely responding to my environment. And I'm in the US, and it's the environment I'm in, so naturally I'm responding to it.
And how are you responding to the environment? Is it changing your art, or what you're talking about?
Naturally, I'm making art in Rhode Island with the friends who are musicians and activists, punk musicians, and they are very vocal about their political opinions, and they're very active in organizing labor, to be exact. And I was so attracted to them as a group because they are everything, maybe that I'm not. Yeah, they're there. So I decided to collaborate with them.
What kind of collaboration are you doing?
I did a small film, very like cut up technique, and about an activist. His name is Joey DiFrancesco, and a few years ago he posted a YouTube video that went viral for. It's got 4 million views or something, where he quit his job with a band. And I'm sure this is like a very, I don't know, it's a common story a bit, where like people go and like, he was an hotel a room service attendant, and they treated them really badly. So he went to his manager, he threw his resignation paper, and a marching band started playing. And I'm good friends with this group, so I made a video with Joey and about the alienation of a worker and what does it mean to be under a capitalist system. But I was mostly very touchy-feely and like about the emotions and daily life. And I gave him a camera, and I told him to, when he's touring, to take videos of like their everyday life, going, eating, going to the bathroom, filling their car with gas.
So your art is becoming more activist.
Yeah. I don't know. It's daily life. It's a reality, I guess.
And a new reality. It's always nice to see something through fresh eyes. You know, you're coming from outside and seeing a scene that we witness all the time here. Just to keep on the sort of U.S. theme, Stephen, how do you think Washington should be engaging with the Arab art world? I'll just ask a British artist and curator. I mean,
they call me Anglo-Saxon in the car. Sometimes. I get that a lot.
And we don't think much about
racism. Sorry?
We don't think much about Arab art in this town. You know, it's a very policy-oriented town. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, what the benefits of that you might.
Well, I think it's profound. I think the fact that story from Abha, and to spend time with those people, will tell you more about the origins of what's happening now politically, and what America and Europe are spending billions of dollars on, than all the meetings that they've been doing in all the great cities. I mean, there's no doubt about it that the current this education that came out of Saudi in the 80s, that was funded in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and then came to all the schools in my town and London and everywhere. There's just no doubt about it that it's, these artists and some of these people are really, if you just listen to their stories, they're not trying to tell you a political story. They just tell you about their lives, and it's understandable. It's like, wow, that really shines a light and opens a window onto something which can turn to empathy, or it can turn to a smart decision, and it certainly can help people make better decisions, I think, on a political level and on a commercial level, because I think that some of the best artists that we've had the privilege to work with, they're not just observing history, they're kind of a little bit ahead of it sometimes. I mean, we both admire the work of Ahmed Martyr in Mecca. There's no doubt that he is ahead of the understanding of what's happening.
And maybe just describe Ahmed's work.
Oh, well, I mean, he's a doctor. Anyway, he's spent the last 3 years in the holy city of Mecca recording the transformation of that city, which is a huge commercial and ideological shift, because they have to expand Mecca because of the growing number of Muslims, but they have destroyed a lot of what was there and rebuilt it and reimagined it. And in his own words, he says that what happens there now in the next 10 years will affect every Muslim, because when you go to Mecca, it's a kind of reflection of your own faith. And of course, he's gone in there with his weapons, which are cameras. He's got permission to use Black Hawk helicopters from the prince, who was the prince in Abha, who happened to move to Mecca, so he was his friend. And he's doing this multifaceted, very, very sophisticated project to record something which I think will become one of the great and most important records of kind of contemporary Islamic life. And he's just an artist, but it has so many implications, that body of work.
So this is why we need to be following it more closely. Oussama, the EU and Europe have traditionally funded the Arab arts. It's not a sphere that the United States has operated in much. Can you talk a little bit about, your view of the role you think the U.S. could be able to play in art funding or not, and if there are any models it should follow? And I should say that we have several State Department officials in this room, many of whom work on public diplomacy in the arts, and I'm sure they would welcome your perspective.
Careful. No, again, I think using cultural diplomacy is unfortunately not the forte of the U.S. Unfortunately, you compare it, for example, to the French or the British and so on. Take as an example the cultural projects that are happening in the Gulf countries right now, and you see actually the actual projects are driven by the Louvre, are more quicker to happen than what happens with other museums and so on. No, it is unfortunately, kind of government public interventions into the arts are not necessarily a very good thing. Of course, one thinks first as money, and we talk about kind of the huge sums of money that are used in military entrepreneurship compared to the very minute amount of money that are injected into culture and so on. Actually, maybe a better model would be to let civic society or public, the private sector actually engage, because they do that on a much more meaningful way, and they create more a bottoms-up type of collaborations and exchanges that are more meaningful, and then they remain for a long period of time. So a preferred model would be, for example, for cultural foundations to engage with the region there, and that's actually happening there. There are very few institutions that do that. The barrier to these, and there is lots of wealth and willingness and curiosity that exists in North America there. We have been exploring this over the last 2 years with institutions like Arte East in New York, if anyone of you is aware of that, trying to figure out what were the barriers in order to engage kind of American public with arts from the region there. And barriers are a bit kind of the lack of knowledge, because people this is the other the North this is a bit like an island, a big island that is very, very far away from the region there. So geographically, there's a distance as well as thematically there. We also are influenced a lot by the media. What we see over mass media are just all the the beheadings, all the issues, the troubles, and so on. That doesn't help either there. However, I'm very optimistic that there is it's a dialogue that is emerging right now between the private sector there, and we are hoping to maintain that. And initiatives like what we heard about is certainly going to help with these things.
Well, on that note, let me just turn to the audience. We only have about 20 minutes left, and I want to give time for others to ask their questions. Any questions to Sarah and Stephen, the lady in the front here? And if you could just wait till you get the microphone, and please state your name and affiliation. Right here, Megan. Right there. Thank you.
Hello. First of all, my name is Hada Nasser. I'm from Saudi as well, from the Eastern Province. And it's an honor to meet all of you. I'm a huge fan. I follow your website, Instagram page, so I knew about the car troubles a few days ago. And I'm actually going to Boston as well. First of all, Sarah, as a Saudi female, and I can speak for all the women I know, we're very proud of you and proud of women like you in Saudi. And it's very inspirational to see people like you. I'm a bit older, so even at my time, the internet wasn't as relevant. We didn't have that outlet. So it's great to see that now, and that it's helping you with your career. So I have two questions to the panel. The first one, since you are a Saudi artist and you work with Saudi artists, I want to know what's the main problem that they find with Saudi and displaying their art. Is it that there's no space? Is it more that it's not accepted? Is it that art sometimes isn't seen as something serious or taken seriously in Saudi, especially by the older generation? And the second question is, I'm not an artist myself, but I work in the art scene and I work with events and exhibitions. And my goal is to promote Saudi artists, and I work with a lot of youth and they're very empowering. So how can I, or people like me, help the movement, the social movement of Edge of Arabia and all these artists?
Sarah, maybe you want to address the first question. What have been the obstacles to being an artist in Saudi Arabia, and how's that changing as well?
I mean, all the obstacles in the end of the day became things that are actually helpful, because once you know your constraints, you can operate within them, and constraints are helpful in that way. They can help you define what you can do and what you can't do. So I think the time that I was producing art in Saudi Arabia was the best. I mean, I didn't look at it that way, but now I do. Now I have many resources and I'm so confused about what to do with them. While there, everything, every little thing proved to be something I can use. And it was interesting to look at what can you do. You have like a stick and a stone, and what can you do with that? What are the constraints? I mean, it's just as the same constraints you have as an individual living there. It's, I think, maybe mobility, maybe like somebody supporting me to hold a camera or lighting or equipment, or having books, mail. I mean, like I can't really order from the internet the books I need. Yeah, I mean, like things that like very practical, on a practical level. It's not anything fundamental.
And can you study art anywhere in Saudi Arabia? Are there any art classes or art schools emerging? Is that changing at all?
I mean, I'm really isolated. I really do. I'm socially very withdrawn. So I don't know much, but I know about, there was an initiative by, I think, a princess in Riyadh to have an art school. I don't know what happened with that one. I have no information. I'm sure somebody else would be able to answer, but I know it's starting. I think art education has like more obstacles in their way. I'm like, how?
Right, it'll be some time before art education is included in the curriculum. I don't know, formal institutions. But there are like individual and community-based centers where I actually started as a young girl learning how to draw and paint in one of these community centers that are like by individual. Just like I think the government also like facilitates. But I mean, my mom is a painter, and she has that center as well, educating her at the first place. But contemporary art education is still. What about the second question? Who would like to address that? Stephen or Oussama? How can our fine questioner
I mean, I would question.
help?
I would say, like, I've been presented again and again as like the Saudi guy. I'm actually not. Like, Edge Arabia is not Saudi, and I think we made a bit of a mistake by building this national brand, and we didn't mean to. It was about artists, and I think the most useful thing, if you're involved in the Saudi scene, is actually to sort of drop the word Saudi and connect artists. You know, on our van, on our RV now is a wonderful photographer called John Morellis. He's from San Diego. He's about the center pivot of our whole project at the moment. and I really love this idea that we sort of, you know, it was very useful. It's very important in Saudi Arabia to get that brand of the artist listened to, I think. But I also think that it's very important to connect it, like Oussama was saying, like that it's an artist thing. It's a network. And in between the US and Saudi, what's wonderful is that I think there's actually a lot of commonality between the US and the Middle East that artists are going to be great at finding stories and common concerns, you know, a lot of common concerns in those two regions. And, you know, they're kind of friends and enemies, but they're in each other's worlds. And it's not necessarily useful to keep pushing Saudi or Gulf, and we talk a lot about Arab and these things, but I think artists can be a little bit beyond that. And I noticed that because we made a big mistake, because we became like the Saudi platform, and before I knew it, I was like, shit. Because I think that the reality is that, we started as just artists, and we got a bit swept up by that.
There's a question here in the front.
It was very interesting to hear the power of social media and the internet, but is that enough to drive it? Are there the options of public spaces and public things where people gather in larger groups and share in a more personal, immediate way, as opposed to only the social media? Is that enough, or are there other options as well?
Perhaps you'd like to comment on all the art fairs and everything happening in the Arab world in these public spaces.
Right. I mean, the public space is something that is very controversial in the Arab region there, and actually there has been an enormous amount of artistic interventions in public spaces there. And the reflection of the type of intervention tells the story, what you can do or what you can't do. So definitely the internet is not sufficient there. Kind of a face-to-face engagement, artists in residency programs, collaboration workshops are something very precious and very much needed. What we talked about is that within the lack of public space, artists reacted using social media. It's not because they didn't want to, but that's what was available there.
I'd say there's one interesting project at the moment in our in Jeddah with the public sculptures. What's really interesting there is, like, when I first went to Jeddah, they have one of the largest collections of public sculptures in the world in the city in Saudi Arabia. They have Henry Moore's, they have
Brancusi,
Miro. I'm not sure if they have a Brancusi, but they have, and it was the mayor in the 70s commissioned hundreds and hundreds of these sculptures all across, and they weren't really considered. Is that not true?
But that's not public space, Right?
Was it not public space?
Well, I mean, they're sitting on roundabouts and kind of rusting away. And,
but they're on the Corniche, Oussama. On the Corniche, you walk along.
I mean, it's being now renovated, and there is a drive to actually turn them into kind of.
So, what I was saying is that like Oussama was saying, is they weren't really. It all seemed really higgledy-piggledy designed, but people kind of picnicked around some of them, and they sort of did what they could, and it was really valuable because I think there isn't that much space, and definitely, like you say, the young generation are meeting online, and it's actually really scary. I think they think it's natural. I think it's like a disaster because nothing beats.
You're old, that's why.
Yeah, I am old now. That's true. No, I think we can all see it. We can all see what technology is doing, and but in Saudi Arabia and in the Gulf, it's really extreme because of the social rules. So I think the family that is supporting our project, the Jamil family, are renovating all the sculptures in Jeddah and really recognizing this importance that actually public space is vital for those conversations outside of the technology conversation, because it's a different type of thing, with little hearts and high fives and all this kind of stuff that we do. Not, I'm not saying you do high fives, but you were playing the game.
We're getting a little ageist.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, just one last point. When you talk public spaces, you talk about Tahrir Square, and there's so much art that has been done there. You're talking about kind of the savage urbanization of places in Beirut that has been giving real estate is taking over the natural public space. It's a place of conflict. It's actually projects that are happening in Algiers where artists try to retake what has been taken away from them. So it's not all. It's a place where actually things are happening today, and then it's not just disappearing. People are trying to claim it back.
Great. Let's take a couple of questions. I'm going to point to Ahmed Ben Shamsi, and then we'll take two more questions, and after Ahmed directly, yes.
Thank you. So yes, my name is Ahmed. I am the editor-in-chief of a website called...
Could you speak up, Ahmed?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So I am Ahmed Ben Shamsi. I'm the editor-in-chief of a website called freearabs.com. Yes, there is such a thing. And I first want to pay homage to the three of you. Well, Sarah, of course, for your artistic work that is stunning, and also Oussama for the very impressive numbers of artists that you are able to bring to the attention of the world. And I think this is a really important work that you're doing. And also, Stephen, I want to thank you from Free Airs because you provided us a lot of material. Actually, we follow you pretty closely and profile your artists on the site. I had a question for you. Actually, I was pretty surprised when you said that ISIS and other terrorist groups, I believe, make use. An extended use of art and creativity. As far as I know, yes, they might use art, but I would not call that creativity because, well, that's my experience so far. Please tell me if I'm wrong, if you believe I am. What I see in the use of art by violent and intolerant groups is merely they use the codes that were developed by creators and artists who invented stuff and then use it to convey a message that is basically opposed to the mere notion of creativity and inventiveness. Like when you say, for example, that they use Gnawa music of North Africa to convey intolerant messages, well, if they dig just a little bit, they find out that Gnawa is pagan music and that behind it there's a message that is pretty not consistent with the core of their message. So I might want to challenge you on the fact that this is creativity. It might be the use of the work of people who were creative originally, but then in a pretty non-creative way. Like if you organized a battle between, these artists and the other ones.
Let's hold your answer. Let's take Dagmar here in the red.
My name is Dagmar Painter. I'm a curator here in Washington of Arab and Arab American art. And my question is about painting. I'd like someone to address the issue of what happens to the plastic arts, such as painting and sculpture, in a situation where, as we were speaking before, the internet is really much more comfortable with film and music and that sort of thing. Are there artists who are still working with paint, and how are they able to express themselves in this contemporary mode? I do notice that, for example, at Dubai and the art fairs, the big art fairs, where there is some painting, it seems like that kind of painting is really there to be monetized. And so I'd like to know, in terms of the creativity aspect, what you've seen in that regard.
Thank you. Let's take one last question. The woman in the back, all the way in the back. Right, that's you. Yes, with the pink shirt.
I have a question about the audience.
And please state your name and your affiliation.
Sorry. I'm Cynthia Whittlesey. I'm one of the people at the State Department who tries to promote some cultural creativity in the field when I'm in the field. But I have a question about the audience. I've worked extensively in the Middle East and also in the former Soviet Union, and we do fund, very small, but we do fund in the local environment different artistic endeavors. Our interest has a policy basis. We want to promote free expression. We want to promote civil society, yada, yada, yada. But the question I have is, we fund these things that I think are really amazing and powerful, but it's the same 6 people who attend, 3 of whom are French or British or American. So my question is about the audience in general for some of these wonderful initiatives.
Thank you. Maybe we'll start, Stephen, with the ISIS question. Sarah, you can talk perhaps about the plastic arts, and Oussama can take the last question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I think I can't say to be any kind of expert. I'm just giving my opinion and what I've seen. I think again, I was shown a video recently of one of these summer camps that one of my artist friends went to when he was a kid, and it was really strange because it was playing the Quran, which is very musical and has this hypnotism to it. It's a straight. I don't know what happens when what microphone they use, but it's incredibly emotional and it's kind of creative. And then in the same, they were playing this, and then they were smashing ouds over there as a symbol of that kind of creativity and expression was not to be allowed at the same time. And I think that this video, I don't know if it relates directly to your question, but it kind of like affected me a bit because I started thinking about how creative that singing of the Quran was, that particular kind of expression of the music. And I don't know, I'm a child of, Europe and growing up in where ideologies, fought, and each ideology used creativity. And with the fascism in Europe used creativity in an extremely powerful way. And I don't think that creativity is something that comes from something new. I think creativity now is, Picasso said there's nothing new under the sun. You can just take something and put it with something else and it has an effect, it has an emotional resonance, and people relate to it. So I think that, I don't think you should write off groups just because they're extremists, that they can't be creative, if that's the thing, because I don't think that's true at all. I think that they're working in the same kind of systems, languages, they're using the same kind of techniques of bringing different things together, layering them, and it has an effect on people. And I think that is a kind of creativity. And if it has an effect, then you have to acknowledge it, that it's there. And that's what I've seen in those things. It's not just about the extremists. The Assad regime was using strange and weird stuff from Disney and mixing it with music and putting it out as propaganda. Then the people, there was a lot of strange stuff going on there now of different groups using stuff, layering it, and throwing it out there as kind of ideology. But it is in the same language, I think, of creativity and artists, and it's a scary thing.
Yes,
but I don't think it's a new thing. Yeah.
Sarah, what about fine arts and painting? What's going on with that? And are you going to paint?
Yeah. When you talk about Middle Eastern art, the first image that I believe most people have is painting, because when you think Iraqi art, for example, it's mostly painting production, Syrian. Even where I come from, most artists work with painting and sculpture. Many artists today, if you go to art fair, we were in Houston Art Fair just recently, and there are many artists who use painting as a medium to express radical ideas. So I don't think painting is in any threat. I think it's very healthy to have digital art trying to establish itself, but I don't think there's any worry in that regard.
And Oussama, if you want to comment on that, and the final question about the audience, how to build an audience.
No, it's certainly very active. Visual arts is kind of entrenched into the production today. There's lots of it happening. The fairs in Dubai, just one aspect of it, but you see it a bit everywhere. There are small cultural centers that are existing in the Arab world for a long, long time that we don't hear of, unfortunately. You have, Ashkal Alwan Beirut Art Center in Beirut. You have the Townhouse in Cairo. You have Darat al-Funun in Jordan, in Amman. There are lots of communities of visual artists around that. And to the question of audience, I have to say it's a bit like everywhere. We have the type of project that we fund are competing with the easy, the general consumer market that we have there. So nowhere is it any different in the Arab region than elsewhere. Unfortunately, lots of the good stuff appears in the film festivals, for example, or in exhibitions, is seen by a small subset of what people consume in terms of art everywhere there. Having said that, we are at a disadvantage because the mechanisms for funding and supporting those kind of things that you have in the US, in Europe, and so on, do not exist necessarily over there. So we are at a natural disadvantage there. But we are facing the same issues. We are competing with the same, big mass of the mass media and so on.
And yet there's more interest in the arts than ever before, witnessed by these incredible art fairs from, Dubai to Abu Dhabi to Sharjah. People are coming out in great numbers, it seems to me, from what I've witnessed in the region, to see conceptual art.
Yes. So but it's we still have if you look at the biggest country in the Arab world, Egypt, that has 85 million people there. It's 0.5% of the women cannot read. A quarter of the men cannot read. We still are way behind in terms of the contemporary art market. Is still seen in many cases as something elitist that is seen in ivory towers and so on. But more and more, especially over the last few years, contemporary art has been engaging with real issues. You know, it's been talked about by the common people there. Street theater, you know, documentaries that are actually happening in the street between to bring bridges with communities there. Projecting video art at night in Tripoli, in Libya. We've supported a project like that, which, you know, was inconceivable a few years back. So it is actually bridging to those large communities much, much easier now.
Well, it's a Friday night. Everybody's hungry. I think we need to wrap, but I just want to say that this is a very inspiring and heartening conversation, and that when we look around and see very disheartening news in the region, we have to remind ourselves that there is this incredible dynamism emerging from the art world in the Middle East, and take heart from that. So thank you all so much for joining us tonight, and please join me in thanking our panelists.